largest in history. We keep seeing the number of people applying for residency in the U.S. go up. The problem is the number of positions isn't going up as fast as the number of people applying, right? So it's getting more and more competitive. But, so as you guys can see, last year we had 940 additional people apply. We had about 541 additional spots. So more competitive than 2014, but that's what we want to keep. We want to keep seeing. We want to keep seeing the number of positions go up, because that's going to mean the more availability, especially for international medical graduates. And it might just be this slide, Andre. Let me go to the next one. The more international positions we have added, the more of an opportunity that we're going to have for international medical graduates. Okay? So some highlights from 2015. More than 30,000 total positions were offered in 2015, an all-time high. So 30,000 positions. Half of the new positions were in primary care. So 600 new primary care positions. Family medicine, internal medicine, pediatrics. And those are generally where international medical graduates have the most success, right? We talked about that a lot on Tuesday. The most friendly IMG positions are those family medicine, internal medicine, emergency medicine. Another cool statistic, especially for international graduates, it's not really cool for U.S. graduates, is the biggest decline in match rate was from previous U.S. seniors. So let's say a U.S. senior didn't match 1 year. Obviously, they're going to try again the next year. We're seeing those numbers go down. And what does that mean? It means that program directors are going to be more likely to take a high-performing international graduate than a low-performing U.S. medical graduate. And that's what we want, right? We want to have the best and the brightest doctors practicing medicine in the U.S. So if you can make your application really competitive, you're going to put yourself in a position to get that spot. Pathology also is very IMG friendly, Hatal. We talked about that a little bit on Tuesday. Pathology is very IMG friendly, but it's not a lot of total availability. So I think something like 30% of pathologists are international medical graduates, but there was only about maybe 600 positions in last year's match. So IMG friendly, but still competitive because not a lot of total availability. And I think we'll talk more about the different specialties in just a minute. Okay, so let's look at the match rate by each different applicant type. Okay, so they break them down into 4 groups: U.S. allopathic seniors and then U.S. osteopathic seniors. So allopathic and osteopathic, there's just 2 types of medical schools in the U.S. For those of you that aren't familiar, MDs and DOs, you might have heard of that. Really not a major thing for the purpose of this conversation, but you can see U.S. allopathic seniors, they have a very high match rate, right? 94% of U.S. seniors match to a residency. So, when we're talking with U.S. medical students, it's about where they're going to match, not necessarily, if they're going to match, as opposed to international graduates, when it's really about how do I make sure I'm putting myself in a position to get those interviews and get that spot. 94% of U.S. seniors, about 80% of the osteopathic grads, so a little lower for them. And then we get down to our international medical graduates. And they break it up between U.S. IMGs, so that's people that are U.S. citizens or green card holders, and non-U.S. IMGs, basically everybody that needs a visa. And we got questions a lot, like if I don't need a visa, is that going to help my chances? And you can see it does. It does a little bit, right? Most of the U.S. IMG number is from a lot of our Caribbean medical students, right? People that are taking medical school offshore, SGU, Ross, AUA, AUC, all those major medical schools. But it's anybody that went to a medical school outside the U.S. but has that green card and has that citizenship. Non-U.S. IMGs does include Canadians and Caribbean students if they're not a citizen. So if somebody goes to SGU and they are not a citizen, then they'd be a non-US IMG. So what we see here, 53% for US IMG and 49.5% for non-US IMGs. Okay, so about half of the international medical graduates that try and get a residency actually do. So, getting a lot of questions about that. International medical graduate is anybody that went to medical school outside of the United States. So if you went to medical school in Canada, you're an international medical graduate. Anywhere outside the US, you're an IMG. A US IMG means that you're a US citizen or you have a green card and you went to medical school outside the country. So me, I'm a US citizen. If I went to medical school in Poland, I'd be a US IMG. If you're from Pakistan and you were born in Pakistan, you went to medical school in Pakistan, you're a non-US IMG. Okay? So again, about half. So these clearly are not numbers that are jumping off the page to anybody, right? 50%. Half the people that try are getting that spot. So how do you make sure that you are putting yourself in a position to get that on the top side of that 50%? There's not much difference between US and non-US IMGs. They both go to medical school outside the US. The only benefit of a US IMG is that some hospitals don't offer visas. They don't offer J1 or H1. So if you don't need a visa, you have a little bit of an advantage because there's more opportunity. If you need a visa, you have to find hospitals that are being willing to offer that. Many do, but some don't. So that's why they have that little bit of an edge. But really, they are very similar. Okay. Elif, it's a little bit of both, right? Does it matter where you go to school, or does it matter if you're a U.S. citizen or not? It matters a little bit where you go to school. But you have to remember, program directors in the U.S. aren't very familiar with different medical schools in other countries, right? I mean, how many medical schools, for example, are there in India? There are a ton. So they don't know the difference between the top medical school in India and the worst medical school in India. So it's really hard for them to look at your school and really use that as a base. That's why USMLE scores are so important. This is the only fair way for them to judge certain candidates. That being said, certain program directors might work with students from one country and they have a good experience, and they might be more likely to choose students from that country in future years. And we see this a lot. And that's why doing research on your residency programs is so important. Find out who the residents are. If you're from Nigeria and you see that they have 5 doctors from Nigeria, hey, maybe that'll give you a little bit of a leg up. There are certain hospitals in the U.S. that are very friendly to the Caribbean medical students. Like they'll take a lot of SGU or RUS students. So if you're an SGU or RUS student, that would be a good place to apply. So researching the program is really important. So you can, again, these things that I'm talking about, they seem like they're small, but they all add up, right? 50% of people get a residency. How do you do every little thing that you can to give yourself that little bit of an edge? Researching the program is a big step. Another important thing to remember, guys, is that we are experiencing a physician shortage in the U.S. And they're estimating that over the next 10 years, we're going to be short about 90,000 physicians, 45,000 primary care, yes, Andrea, and 46,000 surgeons. The Association of Medical Colleges said the national physician shortage will be exacerbated by the expansion of coverage under the new health system reform law and an aging population. So, recent laws in the U.S. made it mandatory for everyone to have healthcare. If you don't have healthcare in the U.S., you pay for it come tax time. So you have to have healthcare. Now that everyone has healthcare, we need more doctors to help service them. And we have an aging population in the U.S. We have a far larger population of older citizens than we do younger. Obviously, as you guys know, that's going to mean we need more doctors. So there are lots of things happening in the U.S. to try and get more residency positions, but the American Medical College has said we're going to need 90,000 more doctors over the next 10 years, and that's all more exactly. It's all more reason why it's going to hopefully get much more friendly for international medical graduates and much more available and less competitive. Okay, so I know we got a lot of questions about specialty, and then here they are. So this is from 2014, and then you see the total number of positions that were offered in the match. Okay, then you have the total number of people that applied, and then how many of them that matched were IMGs. Okay, so you can see what are the most friendly IMG specialties. And then here they are. Now, I'm sure somebody's going to say, what about this? If they're not on this list, it means that less than 100 IMGs matched there. So if less than 100 matched, they didn't include it. So, obviously very competitive. So if you're thinking about something that's not on here, most likely it's going to be pretty tough for IMGs. That being said, it might not be out of the question, but you need to really shoot high on USMLE scores to be considered for things like that. Okay, so you have to think about what specialty you're going to apply to, but then you also have to think about pharmacists is different in the U.S. I'm not sure, Aman, from whatever country you're in, if it's very similar, but pharmacists have to take a different exam. They take the PANCE, P-A-N-C-E. Capital also helps with that, but it's different than the USMLE. It's a different process than doctors. Ulzabot, we need to get you in Congress, because that's obviously the challenge, right? Nobody's denying that we need more residency positions. The problem is paying for them. And there are lots of bills in Congress that are pushing for more and more residency spots. That's the challenge. Harsh, exactly. The Midwest is blank. So this is a map of where the majority of the IMGs are in the U.S. So when you're applying for residency, you have to find out, well, what specialty do I want to apply to, and then what hospitals am I going to apply to from there? And, sometimes we'll have students that apply all over the U.S. They'll apply to 200 programs, all different states. And you have to make sure, you're ready to travel to all these places if you want to do interviews. So a lot of times students will, really pick a couple of areas, and really try and keep the interviews to a couple of states. But as you can see here, the more desirable the city, the more competitive it can be. So New York, Florida, Chicago, California, Detroit, all very IMG friendly, but also competitive. Sometimes, if you're willing to go to the Midwest, it's sometimes a lot easier to get interviews because there is not as much competition. So you have to depend what's best for you. Some people like a busy city and being very active, but some people are willing to just go anywhere, get trained, get started. You have to really decide what's best for you. Andrea is right. There are some challenges in California. I'm not an expert on it. We can put anybody, if you have questions about California specifically, we have Dr. Mary Valentine helping out with private questions, and she's from California, so she could help answer anything specifically. But California does put some extra requirements for IMGs, which can make it more challenging. Okay. So let's talk about match application strategies. 856. Anybody have an idea of what that number represents? We talked about this a couple of times over the last couple of days. Very close, guys. It's actually 856 is the average number of applications that a residency program will receive. Okay, Thomas, you don't have you have to IMED is the official accreditation for ECFMG. If your medical school is listed in IMED, then you're able to apply for ECFMG and get licensed. You don't have to check by state. So if your school's in IMED, you're going to be okay to do this process. 856, the average number of applications that a program receives. Okay? So this is average. I mean, some programs are very large, some programs are very small. 96 interviewed, 77 ranked for 7 spots. Okay? So 856 applications for 7 spots. Okay? Everything we talked about these last couple of days, really important. How do you make sure that you're putting yourself in a position to get those interviews? Okay? Harshness is tough, right? It's especially tough if the application isn't where you want it to be. Okay? Because we talked about this, right? We talked about filters. And every program director has their own set of filters. Okay? So a program might get 856 applications. They're not looking at any of them. Okay? The applications come in through ERAS. All right? That's the place that you apply for programs. Electronic Residency Application Service. Okay? They get 856 applications. They don't look at any of them. They go to the computer, and each program picks their own filters. Okay? So they might say, like I said these last couple of days, anybody above a 220 on step 1, anybody above a 220 on step 2, nobody that failed the exams, nobody that graduated more than 10 years ago, and then go. And then maybe the 856 becomes 300. And then they're going to go to the rest of the application. Then they're going to look at your personal statement. Then they're going to look at your letters of recommendation, your clinical experience. And then they're going to decide who to choose for an interview. So as you guys can see from this slide, 51% of the application received are rejected before they even give a full review of the application. So 51% of the people applying, they're not even getting their application looked at. And that's the challenging part, right? Because you might be a great doctor, a great person, and one thing could be getting in the way of getting those interviews. And that happens to a lot of people. I don't want you guys to think that if I got a low score on step 1, my chances are shot. It definitely makes it more challenging, but it's not completely out of the question. Then you really need to think about other things that you can do to get seen, to network, to get experience. And then you'll have a better chance of getting that spot, getting an interview. But again, you really want to make sure your application is competitive so that you're getting to the next level of the application process and you're getting that chance to get interviews. Okay? And the only way you do that is by getting above average scores and making your application perfect. So just to reiterate, right, we talked about it. They get the applications, then they do their first cut. Then they look at the rest of your application. Then they decide who to call for an interview. Okay? And once you go for the interview, everything changes, right? When there was a survey done by program directors, and they talk about what do you look for when you choose for an interview, and what do you look for when you choose who to rank after the interview. And they're totally different. When it's interview, it's all USMLE scores, years out of graduation, any problems in medical school, things like that. But when it comes down to choosing who to rank, it's all about the person. How well did they do in the interview? Did they get along with the residents? How was their knowledge? How was their appearance and persona? All these different things. Okay, so a couple of questions I want to get to. Rank. What does rank mean? It's a good question. So 2 people do ranks. The students rank all the places they interviewed, right? So let's say you got 10 interviews, you're going to go and you're going to rank all the places you interviewed top to bottom. And you don't have to worry about, does this place like me or does that place like me? You rank top to bottom where you want to go the most. The match, it favors the applicant, okay? Then the hospitals rank everybody they interviewed. So let's say a hospital has 10 spots and they rank 80 people. Then the match happens. And the match looks at the people that applied and looks at the hospitals and it fits people into spots. So if the hospital ranked 80 people, that doesn't mean all 80 people are going to rank them high. Other people might rank other hospitals above them, so they're not going to get matched to that place. It's a little bit of a confusing process, but all you need to know is that every place that you interview, you rank top to bottom where you want to go the most, and the hospital ranks all the people they interviewed top to bottom. So Amy says, so USMLE is supposed to have nothing to do with rankings. I wouldn't say nothing, Amy, but very little. Very little. Little. If you get called for an interview and you have a 235 on step one, and the person next to you has a 225 on step one, but they do a much better job of engaging with the program, they were prepared, they had good questions, they really showed that they want to be a part of that program. You think the program director is going to take the person with 235 over 225? Absolutely not. They're going to take the person that they think has the best chance to fit in their program. So it's much, when it comes down to getting the interview, it's all about that stuff. After the interview, it's all about, during the interview, it's all about impressing them. Amy, obviously program directors are going to want the best and the brightest. So if they get somebody with a great score at step one and they're a little socially awkward, might they consider them? It's not a perfect science. There's no correct answer. But all I can tell you is this from the surveys, from the experience that I have. When it comes down to choosing who to rank, scores are going to be much less of a factor. It's going to come down to what the program thinks and what the residents think. There is a rank deadline. I'm not sure if it's the exact same day for residents, for students and hospitals. I only know for students, but it's in February. By February, you have to submit your rank order list. Trying to get to some more questions. No, Fatima. So that's a good. So Fatima says, is it best to rank the hospitals based on where you think you have a higher chance of being? You don't have to do that because, like I said, it favors the applicant. Let's say you pick 10 places, and the top 5 are like reaches. They're really good hospitals, but you might not have a chance of getting them. That doesn't matter. If the 6th hospital ranks you high enough to make their cut, and the other 5, you'll go to the 6th. It favors you. You don't have to worry about not matching because you ranked a place low. You rank top to bottom where you want to go the most. Is there such a thing as practicing for interview? Absolutely, Mama. If you're not practicing for the interviews, you're making a mistake. In December, I'll give you guys a link before we leave. We have a workshop on interviewing for residency. So we'll talk all about the interview process, type of questions they ask, all those different things. I'm trying to read Karen's question. It's a long question. I was talking to a cardiologist head resident who had to do interviews for new residency applications, and he said that they don't really look at USMLE scores because you wouldn't have made it to the interview. Exactly, Karen. And that's what I'm trying to convey. And remember, we talked about personal statements, right? You don't know how many personal statements that I read that have why they didn't do so well on USMLE. They'll say in the personal statement, my USMLE score is a little lower than I want it to be, and it's because of this, it's because of this. You have one page to show the program director who you are. And like I said, I guarantee you that if the program director is reading your personal statement, they already looked at your score. I mean, look at this slide. No program director in the world is reading personal statements if they haven't already seen the score. And if they saw the score and it wasn't a deal breaker, guess what? Say positive. It's not out of the question. And the same thing goes for the interviews. Everybody that gets called in for an interview, by definition, they're acceptable. And then it comes down to choosing who is the best fit. So scores are important. When it comes down to the interview, it's all about how well of a job you do. People are asking about how many specialties. How many places should I apply? It's going to be different for everybody. I think on average, it's probably somewhere between 60 and 80 for an IMG to really feel comfortable. You really want to shoot for 6 to 10 interviews to really give yourself a good chance. You get 2 interviews, you still have a chance of getting that spot. But the more interviews you get, obviously, the better chance you have of getting that spot. You can apply to more than one specialty. Absolutely, many people do it. I've spoken to hundreds of program directors over my time at Kaplan, and every program director is different. Ultimately, from the overall opinion, program directors know that it's competitive for IMGs. They know that you have to do everything you can to get that spot. That being said, program directors want somebody that is committed to their specialty and is committed to their hospital. So you might not want to do different specialties at the same hospital, because if you go for an interview and you run into the program director that you saw last week for internal medicine when you're coming for surgery, it just doesn't look as great. So if you're going to do 2 specialties, you might want to do 2 different hospitals, but definitely, think about that. And just remember, whatever interview you're on that day, you're prepared, and that's where you want to be. But that's your focus. That's where your heart's set, because program directors need to see that. They need to know that you're committed. So don't say, yeah, well, I'm here for internal medicine, but I have always really dreamed of being an OBGYN, because guess what? They're not going to rank you high because they know where your priorities are. So just keep that in mind. Another thing is you can submit multiple personal statements. So you don't have to just do one. You could do different personal statements, but you might do one for each specialty. But just make sure that you send the right one to the right specialty, because it's happened before. The last thing that you want to do is the last line of your personal statement to say, that's really why I want to be a part of your internal medicine program, and you send it to a bunch of surgery programs. That's a surefire way not to get an interview, okay? So, Andre, it's happened, believe me. So be careful with that. When you're doing with ERAS, you want to make sure you're being careful before you submit. Yeah, Amy, you might, some people, their personal statement is generic, that they could use it for any specialty, but some people's personal statement's more specific to the specialty, and then you could do different ones. Okay, we talked about this already, so I won't make you guys guess again, but you know this, right? Average step 1 score for an IMG that matched 227. Average step 1 score for IMG that didn't match, unsuccessful, 213. Average step 2 score, 233. Average step 2 unmatched, 218. And believe me, Suleiman, a lot of people are looking at this slide and they're saying, damn, my score is below what I need to be. And that doesn't mean that your chances are done. It just means that you need to really focus on, how do I make my application stronger, and how do I find the right programs? Because there are people that, I spoke to a student yesterday that got interviews. He had 206 on step 1, passed step 2 CS, and he was waiting for his step 2 CK score. He didn't even have it yet. And I was so surprised that he got any interviews, and he actually got 6, because he really focused on programs that he knew were friendly to IMGs and that were lenient. So something to think about. We're getting questions about U.S. clinical experience, so I'll address that quickly as well. U.S. clinical experience, People ask, what's the difference between an observership or a clerkship or all these things? Don't get caught up in that. They're the same. Clerkship, an observership, an externship. Don't get caught up on that. Get caught up in what you're doing. Any experience is good experience. So I don't think you should pass up any opportunity. Program directors like you being in a hospital setting. You're never going to be really hands-on patients much. You want to be shadowing a residency program. You want to understand the way a hospital works, and that's what program directors want to see. When people ask, should I do it in the specialty that I want to apply to? If you can, absolutely. Because you got to remember that you're going to get a letter of recommendation after the experience, and then the letter will be in your specialty, and that helps. So sure, if you can get it in the specialty that you're interested in, go for that. I don't think you could do double residencies. I don't think there's such a thing as double residency, but there are things such as subspecialties. So if you match to internal medicine, after you finish your 3 years in internal medicine, you might do a subspecialty, which they call fellowships in cardiology or gastroenterology or something like that. So then you'll be dual certified, but you don't generally do two general residencies like internal and emergency or internal and surgery. Eugene, unmatched just means they didn't match. So they might have gotten interviews, they might not have. They applied for residency and didn't match. J-Doc, you should speak to a medical advisor. They do have loans that are available. You just have to speak to them about that. Smitha, how do I find IMG-friendly hospitals? It's a good question, and it's not an easy answer. It's tedious. The very first thing, Harsh, I think I'll get back to that question. We just talked about clinical experience, so maybe I talked too fast, but any experience is good experience. Where do you find the different residency programs? So the first thing that you're going to want to do is go to FRIDA. Go to Google and type in FRIDA, and you have to create an account. You have to create a username and a password, but you can search for every single residency program by state and by specialty. You can look up every internal medicine program in New York. It'll give you some general info about the program. Do they offer visas? What's the program director's name? Sometimes they'll even give you their average USMLE scores. Not all the time, but sometimes. It'll give you a link to the website. So you need to it's not something that you're going to do in one day. You have to dedicate a couple of weeks to really doing your homework and finding out about the program. And remember what we said on Tuesday. You want to research programs for two reasons. One, to figure out where do I have the best chance of getting an interview. But two, hopefully, you're going to go on these interviews. And what I say before, program directors want somebody that want to be a part of their hospital. So when they ask you the question, do you have any questions for me? That's the perfect time to show them that you did homework about the program, you know about the program, you're interested in about the future of the hospital, all those different things. Molly asks, how do the programs rank applicants? Is there a checklist? It's different for every program. I know some program directors that they interview the candidates one-on-one, and then they rank them, program director. I know some programs that when you go for interview, you meet the program director, you meet the chairman, you meet all the residents, and then they fill out like a checklist, like you said, and then they rank together based on that. So every program is different. Here's a breakdown of score by specialty. So I know some of you guys are saying that the last slide was tough to look at, but there are some specialties that are a little bit more lenient in score. Emergency medicine is on the lower end, physical medicine on the lower end in terms of average scores. Take a look at this. We're getting a lot of questions. I'm going to try and do my best to answer as many as I can as I see them. They're flying in. Emmanuel asks if we studied internal medicine for 10 years I guess I'm assuming you mean in your country, and then we go for fellowship. Do we need to take the steps again? If you haven't taken, if it's not in the U.S., then yeah. If you haven't done the USMLE, you have to apply for residency, no matter how much experience you have in your country. LF, no. It's getting late in the process. Ellis asks, if I didn't hear from programs by now, does this mean I won't hear from them? It's getting late, so if by like the middle of December you haven't heard, it's probably could be soon, but you still have some time. This is the average score for each specialty. Every program, every single hospital has their own criteria. You know, some hospitals might be higher, some hospitals might be lower. Luma asks, is there any advantage from waived versus unwaived recommendation letters? It's a tough question, Luma. Every program director is different. Some program directors don't care. Some program directors prefer unwaived. And really, generally, if you're confident in the person writing it, you don't need to see it. If you're not sure, then see it. No big deal. Romulo asks, I saw it free that some programs do not require step 2 to consider an interview. Is that correct? That's correct. You can apply for residency without one of your scores if it's pending. By the time you match, you have to be ECFMG certified, so that has to be done by then. From my experience working with IMGs, you know, it's very difficult to get interviews unless you have a completed application. Unless the program knows you personally and they know that step 2 is coming. Remember, I said 856 applications. Are they going to interview somebody that doesn't have a full application? Very, very difficult. Again, if it's not on this list, less than 100 people matched. So with regard to dermatology is very difficult for U.S. graduates. IMGs, it's very, very difficult. Would you give us an example of the ranking list? How do they rank, and also where should we stand in their list in order to be matched there? I don't know what you mean about an example. If you had 10 interviews, you're going to rank top to bottom where you want to go the most. A hospital has 80 people they interviewed, they're going to rank. They might not rank all 80, maybe they'll rank 60, but they might have 12 spots, right? So then the first 12 people that the hospital ranks, it's not going to just be those people that match because the match favors the applicant. So the top 12 they pick, they might go to another hospital. Then they'll go down to the next person on their list. And then maybe they go to a different hospital. So usually, like let's say a hospital has 12 spots and they rank 60 people or 80 people. It might go down to like their 40th rank for their last position because it checks the applicants, it's a mathematical system. How do you update programs about step 3? This is a good question about a broader topic. So this happens a lot. If you apply to programs in ERAS, you apply to residency programs, you press submit, and then let's say something comes in, something changes. Like you were waiting on step 2 CS score, and you apply, and step 2 CS score comes in, it doesn't automatically show up. You would then need to contact programs and tell them, hey, my step 2 CS score is in, can you add to my application? And that's obviously not an ideal process because these people are so busy. That's why I really always encourage people to have things done before they apply, if you can, right? If you take step 3 and you want to send them an email and say, hey, just want to let you know I applied to your program, my step 3 score came in, here's the score, that's fine. You know, you could talk about it in the interview. I don't think step 3, score would change things that much, but if you have something come into your application after you apply, you have to contact the programs. They don't know about it automatically. OBGYN has low